Good afternoon, everyone. Very warm welcome to you all joining us this afternoon at our second webinar in our Thoughtful Thursday series. For anyone joining us this afternoon who doesn't know us, we are Irish in Britain and we're a membership charity supporting a network of Irish organisations throughout Britain and the wider community. My name is Ashley McDowell. I will be hosting today's session. So before I hand over to my colleagues, I'm just going to run through some housekeeping. Our webinar today is being recorded and it will be uploaded and accessible on our website as part of our dementia training and information. As attendees, your cameras are off and your microphones are on mute. However, we have both a chat box and a Q&A box to the bottom of the screen. And if you please post any questions or queries in those boxes throughout today's session, I will monitor that throughout, and we will also hold a space for Q&A towards the end of the webinar. If anyone attending today doesn't wish to be contacted in future about any of these webinars, then please let me know in the chat function or after today's session. I will now hand over to Zibby. Zibby is our Prisoner Development Coordinator. She will speak briefly and then introduce today's speaker. All right.
Thanks very much, Ashling, and a warm welcome to everybody joining us today. This is the second of our Thoughtful Thursday Quivener webinars, and we're delighted today to welcome Karen Webb. Karen is a specialist planning nurse, and she works for an NHS foundation, and we've been pleased to invite Karen in the past and very, very pleased to have her back again today. Karen's going to be talking about a really important topic connected with dementia care, and her title is When the Person You Love Needs More Care Than You Can Give. So I'm going to hand over to Karen now. Karen will talk to us and then there will be an opportunity for questions towards the end of the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, my name's Karen Webb and I'm a Discharge Planning Specialist Nurse. So my job usually involves helping people who are leaving hospital after an acute illness or who have been in rehabilitation units being moved out of those. So in the past, I've also been a nurse and I've worked in management in care homes. And so I was really pleased to be asked to come along and talk today about when your loved one needs more care than you're able to give, what should you do next? Specifically thinking about moving into residential or nursing care homes. Nobody likes to think of their loved one needing to have more care than they can give, but you will know when the time comes that you're unable to really meet the person that you love's needs. Sometimes people living with dementia can start to exhibit behaviours that are totally unlike the person that you've known all your life. And in that case, it can be much more beneficial for them to move into a specialist unit so that you can then visit them and maintain your relationship with them as a loved one, rather than trying to care for somebody where you may not understand all of the reasons behind their behaviours, and also where you can get extremely worn down. And I know that for those of you watching and taking part, many carers spend most of their time exhausted. So I don't underestimate the challenge that you face at all. So if you're thinking about moving your loved one into a care home, there are some things to really think about. The first thing is that your gut feeling really counts. And you must listen to what your gut is telling you about the place that you go to visit. My first rule of thumb to give you is never make an appointment. If you are asked to make an appointment, I know we're in COVID-19 at the moment, so many homes are quite reluctant to have people walking around them, but most of them should by now have put in place things that should mean that they can allow you to visit, to speak to the home manager and to see a video or a presentation of the home and to be able to see staff moving around within it. So don't make an appointment, just turn up and see what your reaction is from the people at the home. Usually if you arrive to see a home, they will at the moment ask you to do a lateral flow test. So that's a test where you put the cotton bud round the back of your throat and up your nose, swim it around in a solution, and then onto the test strip. So once you've been cleared as not having COVID, you should in reality be allowed into the main part of the care home. And your first impression is really important. And I can say, having been in many, many care homes, because I used to assess people for continuing healthcare purposes. So I've been around many care homes in the past. And you can follow what would be called the 10-step rule. Within 10 steps, you're going to have a really good idea of what the overall impression of this home is. Does it smell? Is a really good starter, because anywhere that smells dirty or offensive may not be going to offer your loved one the care that they need or deserve. What are the temperament of the staff that you meet with? Many people will gild the lily and tell you all sorts of wonderful things about their home, but do the actions that you're seeing in the home mirror what you're being led to believe? Because people can make lots of promises that are then not kept up. So your first impression when you go into a care home is really important. Look to see, can you see any staff? What do they look like? Do they look like they take care of their appearance? Because if they don't take care of their appearance, they're definitely not going to take care of your loved one's appearance. What are their mannerisms and their ways of working? Because sometimes where people are not well led, you'll see poor behaviours, you know, behavior that you wouldn't expect in your own home going on. So you need to just keep an eye out for that sort of thing. Is the place tidy? Are the floors clear? Because what you don't want is your loved one tripping over stuff that's left around. And can you see any interactions going on between your loved one or the resident that's living at the home and the staff that are there? Because that will show you the level of respect and dignity that your loved one is going to be treated with. The way that we always worked in the care home that I worked at was, our view was we came to work in their home. It was their home, and therefore everything we did was on the basis of their agreement, their understanding, and a shared purpose to do it. So you wouldn't, for instance, go into anybody's room without knocking and waiting to be asked to enter. You would keep their things private. So first impressions are important. If it doesn't look like a place that you would want to leave your loved one, then it isn't the right place. The next thing to talk about is the access arrangements for actually getting there. Not just you, but other members of your family who might want to visit. Do they have parking? Is it near the bus stop? Can you get the train? What time do they allow visiting? They should allow visiting at any time, as long as it's only one person. If it's a family group, then I would imagine they will want to, particularly during COVID, they would want to have a timed visit, because there are so many people wanting to use the visitors' room and they have to clean it between people to avoid COVID. But the access is just as important as the home itself, because the most important thing for somebody living in a care home is that they have ongoing relationships that need to be maintained. Next thing to think about is the staff that work at the home. Don't be afraid to ask questions about, in the area where your loved one might be living, how many staff would be on duty, on shift at any one time? What level of staff are they? What sort of training have they had? What sort of training is open to them? Particularly if your loved one is living with dementia, you want to make absolutely sure that the staff are well trained and up to date in ways of supporting and assisting people who are living with dementia, because well, you know yourself that people will have differences in the way that they interpret information and the way that they receive it and the way that they behave having had information. You need to know that the staff looking after your loved one are going to be giving as much care to communicating with your loved one as you would yourself, or at least as near as can be possible. So the amount of training that staff have, the training in what, and the numbers of staff that are on duty is really, really important. You will often find that at weekends in many homes, they will run down to a skeleton staff. Some homes won't have any management on at weekends because, so that is something to look into as well. Is there always a manager on duty, not on call 20 miles away at home, but is there always a manager on duty who is leading the clinical team looking after your loved one? The next area to think about is the assessments that go on for your loved one. So thinking about, if they move into this home, who will their GP practice be? Have a look at the GP practice on CQC's website to see what they're like as a practice. Do they do visits, or do they do everything by webcam? Are they responsive to the home? You can look at all sorts of member satisfaction sites and groups to see what people think of that GP practice, as well as what do people think of the home that you're thinking about for your loved one. A question to ask on your visit is, if my loved one needs to go to hospital for a fracture clinic or for any other sort of outpatient, how would they get there? Would I be expected to come along and take them? Will an ambulance be booked? Will a taxi be booked? If a taxi is booked, who's paying for the taxi? So those sorts of things are also important to know, because most homes run on quite low levels of staff. So if your loved one is going to be going off to hospital, that might take a whole day. So who would be going with them to the hospital? Unfortunately, I've had lots of experiences of people, frail elderly people, sent to hospital in ambulances, spending their day sitting in a wheelchair, waiting for somebody to come and collect them. And that's not really not really pleasant. And there should be either staff from the home, relatives, or you can ask Age Concern or other voluntary groups to come along and accompany your loved one to make sure they've got a hot drink, something to eat, because these days can be long and very bewildering for people living with dementia. Are there any questions at this point? I don't want to just keep rattling on. If somebody does have a question, please go ahead.
Thank you, Karen. We actually do have a question here. Are you referring to care homes or nursing homes?
Ah, right. Okay. All homes are care homes now. There isn't a distinction between nursing homes and care homes in the titles. So when you look them up online or in magazines, they'll be referred to as care homes. The way that they are now allocated is they're called care homes with nursing. So that's the way to distinguish between care homes and care homes with nursing. A care home will be staffed by trained staff who've been trained through their own organisation or by local authority and are trained in giving care. That will include giving medications, as long as they are tablets or syrups, but it won't include any sort of injected or anything through any other feed mechanism. Some people have peg feeds because they're not able to swallow, so they have a tube inserted into their tummy and their food goes in through that. A care home wouldn't usually have somebody with a peg feed, so somebody needing that sort of feeding would usually be living in a care home where there's a nurse to oversee that. So when you go to a care home with nursing, people living in those homes have nursing needs. Now, you and I might talk about what nursing needs are, and in the old days when I trained, people living with dementia were seen as automatically having a nursing need. Unfortunately, the way that social policy and the law has moved, because providing care is costly, the government and various local authorities have decided that care for people living with dementia can be undertaken by trained social carers, and that only certain needs are needing nursing intervention. So I don't want to get political about it, but basically, if your loved one is exhibiting very problematic behaviour, so if they become agitated to the point where they won't respond to your prompts or to direction or to correction, and instead become quite physically intimidating or imposing, which does sometimes happen, sadly, then somebody who's living with those sorts of challenges would be better cared for in a home that's got nursing on the premises. And the reason for that is because we as nurses are more highly trained and skilled in managing some of those behaviours. Similarly, if it's a special need around feeding, or if somebody is starting to choke on their food, then they would usually be in a nursing, in a care home with nursing. But on paper anymore, they don't get called nursing homes or care homes. They're all care homes, some of them with nursing. So you have to look into it a little bit. In the 10 years ago, they would be a nursing home or a care home. Now they're all care homes, some of them with nursing. And obviously, if you're in a care home with nursing, then the costs associated with that are higher than they are in residential care homes. So that's another thing to be aware of, but please don't let the cost be your driver, because I can tell you now, I've been in some homes that cost an awful lot of money, that have beautiful thick carpets, beautiful furnishings, but the quality and standard of the care that they deliver doesn't meet up to those things, which is why I would say that your first impression, your gut response to what you see and the relationships you see between people are really what should tell you whether your loved one would be happy living in that environment. I remember as a student nurse, this is going back to the early 80s, I remember being sent to escort an elderly lady to a care home in North London. And we went in the ambulance to deliver this lady to her new address. And we got there, it was an enormous house. It was like a mansion, really grand and beautiful. Everything was all gold and marble and, lovely. You could tell that it probably cost an arm and a leg to be in there. But what I noticed when I went into the room where this lady was pushed in her wheelchair to wait for a carer to come along, what I noticed was that the carpet meant that she wouldn't be able to use the walker with the wheels on it that she'd been given by the hospital, because the pile on the carpet was too thick. So I thought, essentially, this lady is now going to become immobilized because she can't move. And also there was no sign of any staff anywhere. So I'm sure it cost a fortune. It was a very grand, very plush. It probably had one of those home cinemas underground, but actually in terms of its environment for somebody who was living with dementia, clearly frail and needing company and reassurance, it was a cold and Spartan environment for her. So I would say quite often when you go along to a home, if you're picking up a sort of a jolly, happy environment where the staff seem at ease with the residents and the residents appear to have trust and confidence in the staff, that's worth 10 times a thick pile carpet and waitress service for meals. That's my view anyway, based on my experience. So the next area that I wanted to touch on is security. When you move into a care home, you will need to know that your loved one is in an environment that is certainly not a prison, it's their home, but are they kept safe from people outside the home? How do people get into the home? Is there a special key or keypad? How do people enter? What you should be looking for is that there's an entry phone and somebody available all the time to know who it is they're letting in through the front door. Some people living in care homes, particularly care homes with nursing, will be under an order that's called a deprivation of liberty and safeguard order. Now, that's partly to stop that person from being able to leave. So sometimes people living with dementia, as their cognition fails, they would put themselves at severe risk. Some of you will be looking after loved ones in that situation where you wouldn't want them to go off down the road because they wouldn't be able to maintain their own personal safety. For a similar reason, you wouldn't want sometimes people to be able to just walk out of the home and into the road or whatever. So you need to know that there is security, that there's always somebody at the front door who would be able to either let in the right people or let out the right people without letting out or in somebody who would be either at risk to themselves or be a risk to others. And believe me, this does happen from time to time. It is something to really quiz when you go into a care home, because there are, as you know, some people who will, if they see a door that's open and an opportunity, will come in and look for things to take, unfortunately. So security is important, but once you're in the care home, it's also important that your loved one has their own space, which is their space and is private to them, and that they can lock their things securely away for safekeeping. It shouldn't be a free-for-all, and especially if your loved one is living with dementia that's quite advanced, they'll probably be in a setting where there are other people living with advanced dementia, and those people don't always understand or appreciate other people's space. They can inadvertently come into somebody else's room. So you want to make sure that there are places that you can put things that will mean they don't get disturbed by any other resident, staff, or anybody that shouldn't be touching them. Being able to personalise the space is vital, especially for people living with dementia. So having to hand, I mean, most of the residents that lived at the home that I worked at had next to them at all times photograph albums. These are vital to keep those links going between people that they love and the outside world. So photograph album is a really good thing to take in if somebody's moving into a care home, and good to have with them at all times. Also, the other sorts of things that people have are little notebooks that have got notes in them saying, hello, today is Tuesday, the weather is sunny, your son, whoever, is coming to see you this afternoon for tea. So any of those sorts of prompts and aid memoirs is going to be really special. So talk to the home about what do they do to ensure that your loved one is orientated to the day, the time, because people living with dementia can't orientate themselves very easily. So have a look around the place. Are there clocks all over the place? Are there signs up everywhere that they could see that tell them what day, what date it is, what the weather's like? Those things are important. So, but personalizing your room is really, I think, vital. Small pieces of furniture are usually no problem at all, as long as you're not cluttering the floor so somebody's going to trip over stuff. Small items of furniture are fine. Certainly bedding and quilts are a good idea, things that people love. Pictures on the walls, check, can they put up their own paintings or photographs on the walls? Can you do that for them? Can they have a place to store their own food if they want to have some in their room. Lots of people have things that they enjoy to eat. So I've often had people living in the care home I was at whose relatives would bring in supper for them so that they could have cheese and biscuits in the evening in their room or whatever it is. But to have a little place that's available to store your own food is a good thing, as long as you're not storing a whole kitchen cupboard in it. But to have your own biscuits and things is good, especially if you're going to have visitors, because it's always nice to be able to host your visitors. And I think the more that you can ensure that your loved one feels that this is their space, that they invite people into it, and that they are in control of that space, the better and the happier they'll be, and the more settled they will be in their care home. Next thing to look at is the mixture of residents living there. Most homes, and this is, I would strongly advise against looking at very large care homes. In my experience, they can sometimes resemble warehouses or storage units more than they do places where people live. Now, some people like to live in very compact communal spaces. If your loved one has always lived in a small flat in a big block of flats, then a large care home may be a good environment for them. If they haven't, then that environment may be quite unsettling and more like sort of starting school than moving into a care home. So my tendency is to avoid huge homes, because the reality, sadly, is that often those huge homes have great trouble in providing adequate staffing numbers to care for the residents. So I would have a good look at that when you go and assess. But look at the mixture of the residents. You should be looking to see whether there are people like your elderly relative living there, because these are going to be the people in their community. These are the people that they're going to have their breakfast with every day and their lunch and tea. And these are the people that they're going to have their social events with. So if they seem broadly similar to your loved one in their taste and what they like, then that's a good sign. I mean, my dad loves classical music. And I think if I took him and placed him in a home where it was always, pop music, I think he'd probably be very unhappy. So I would always be looking for somewhere where people could choose their own music when they were in their own space. And when I was in the care home, one of the things that used to be a bit of a bugbear for me was, as I was doing the medicine rounds, I'd go around the home and it would be very, very noisy, all playing sort of heart radio or Radio 1, because that's what the care staff enjoy listening to. So as they were going round, I was going around with the medicines, tuning the radios into the stations that the residents liked, because 9 times out of 10, the residents would enjoy smooth radio that didn't have any news programs, because sometimes that could be unsettling to them. Some of them liked classical music, so if they did, I'd put classic FM or whatever on for them, or smooth classics. But thinking about your loved one's tastes is important. Any new questions, Aisling?
Not just now, Karen. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. I didn't want to just keep going if anybody did want to know anything.
No, it's great, but not just yet.
Good. Okay. So
can I just ask a question, Karen?
Please.
Just about the very interesting the notion that they're all called care homes now, but some are care homes with nursing. What's the difference in the financial arrangements for those?
Okay, so I live in Cambridgeshire, so the fees in Cambridgeshire are quite different to the fees in London, although I would say that as you get towards Cambridge, the fees are pretty much the same as most areas of London. So as a rule of thumb, a residential placement for a self-funding resident, that's somebody who has assets in excess of 23,000, I think it's £300, for somebody who is therefore counted by social services as a self-funder, a residential placement will cost usually around £600 a week. If they have nursing needs, then that fee can rise as much as £1,200 to £1,400 a week. So the changes are very large. But if your loved one is living with a care need that means they need nursing, then you should be eligible for a funded nursing contribution. It's not worth a huge amount. It's worth about £125 a week, but it is a good amount towards the cost of the fees. And of course, when your loved one's assets drop to below 23,800, then the state picks up the bill. And it's amazing how quickly the care homes will adjust their fees in order to retain their residential or nursing residents on local authority rates. But I'm afraid that if you've got money, if you've saved all your life and you've got assets more than £23,800, the state says there's no help for you financially until you get down to the 23,800. Now, what you're saving all of your life for has bought you is choice. So if I have assets more than 23,800 and I'm a self-funding resident, I get the choice of where I want to go and I get to pick and choose. If I don't have assets of 23,800, then the state gets to choose where I go. Or if I've got a lasting power of attorney, then my lasting power of attorney can choose with adult social care, but they won't be empowered to make the decision unless they're going to pay for it. So it's quite tricky, and I think it's very, very important that people have a good read of the CQC reports, and of, if you go online and look up continuing healthcare, you can find all sorts of information about continuing healthcare, the costs and how to meet needs. You can also talk to social services about how care is funded. But essentially, those people who've got a load of money that they've saved are buying choice. And a reputable company would say that once you've spent your money and you're now at state funded level, a reputable company would say, we would maintain your place here at this home. I'm afraid, and it is important to ask, there are a good many private firms, particularly some of the larger names, who would be quite happy once you've spent all your money to say, well, you can't live here anymore, and you'd be left looking for another home, which for some people living with dementia, well, you don't even have to be living with dementia, but particularly people living with dementia, I think is just scurrilous, because essentially it's saying you were all right to live here while you had money. Now you don't. You've got to find somewhere else to live. And I get really angry. And the care home I used to work for, we didn't make anybody leave. They all stayed with us, which made the manager very unpopular with his company bosses, because they didn't like that. We weren't making enough money for the company. Mm-hmm. But his view was he was there to provide a home for the residents. So those things, they might seem very uncomfortable to talk about, but it is really important you have those conversations, because what you don't want is for somebody to be really happy and love living somewhere for 3 years or 4 years and then become not eligible to be self-funding, not in the same position, and to have the home say, well, you have to go now unless you're going to pay for it privately.
Dreadful. Thanks, Karen. Shocking, isn't it?
It is, and it is, and that's why I think, care is a business. Unfortunately, nobody will view your loved one in the same way that you do. And the companies, the bigger the company, the more they're trying to make money for their business. And care over recent years, because of all the legislation and all the safeguarding and all of those things, care has become quite expensive to provide. So these companies are seeing their margins shrink. So I know that when I worked at a care home, we were told by regional management, you know, the golden egg, if you like, was the self-funder with loads of money, you know, get them in. We don't want the state-funded people. So please be vigilant and look around the place. I would, on the whole, tend to look for a place where it's a smaller firm, as long as you can be sure you've seen the Care Quality Commission report and you feel that those people are going to provide for you. Because don't be under any illusions, I'm quite sure there are small firms who run single-handed care homes who provide very poor care as well. It really is a buyer's market, because don't forget, the sadness about COVID-19 is that it has unfortunately led to significant numbers of people losing their lives. So from those businesses' point of view, they've got beds that they need to fill. So from your point of view as people looking after and caring for your loved ones, it is a buyer's market. And I would say, you know, if your loved one has been vaccinated against COVID-19, their risks are relatively small. You should feel pretty safe. Most of the care home population now has been vaccinated, has had 2 vaccinations, and the staff are supported as well by it. And all of the research coming out is showing that if you've had your COVID vaccinations, not only you, but all the people that are around you also achieve a level of protection from catching COVID. So if I could say anything, it's please get your COVID vaccination if it's offered to you, because it does give you a level of support and safety. And as I say, it's a buyer's market at the moment. You are not there to be the cannon fodder for some big company trying to make money out of your loved one. You are there to look for somewhere that's going to be secure for your loved one to feel safe, well cared for, and have a good experience of living there.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So the next thing to ask about is food. Food is so important, and I get very angry about the lack of attention paid to food in hospitals, certainly, because to me it's often more important than the medicines that we give people. And you'll know yourself what your loved ones like to eat and drink. So you need to know that they will have access to those things to eat and drink. How often will they be offered tea and coffee during the day? If they fancy a cup of tea and it's not the tea round, how do they go about getting one? And is that okay? Because if it's not okay, walk away. You should be able, in any care home, to ring a bell or ask a member of staff and get within 15 minutes a light meal and a cup of tea or coffee or hot milk or whatever you want. Light meal, I'm talking, you know, some scrambled eggs on toast or beans on toast or a milky drink, whatever it is. But any home at any time of the day or night should be able to provide you with a small meal and a hot drink. And that's important if people go off to an outpatient appointment or the dentist or something. You want to feel sure that they're not going to come back and be told, well, you're too late for your dinner. You'll have to wait till tea time now. Those things are important. Food is important. So when you go to the care home, ask to look at the menu for that day, because not only should they have a meal put in front of them, but they should have a meal of their choice offered to them. Ask about portion sizes. Many of the older people that I've worked with would be overwhelmed by an enormous plate full of food. And many of them quite like to have a smaller size plate of food that they can enjoy rather than be put off by an enormous plate. So ask, can they ask for more food if they want it? and have a look. I always say to people, if you've gone for a visit and you've quite liked it, turn up again at a mealtime and have a look at what's being served, smell what's being served, and see how people are interacting with their food. Do they look like they're enjoying what's being offered to them? So those things are also key, because food is a massive part of our living. It's a big social part of the day. So see what happens at meal times, because once people have had their 2 weeks in isolation for COVID-19, they should be mingling as part of the care home society. So it's a good idea to go in at a meal time to be able to see how are people seated. Are they offered drinks at meal time? Do they look like they're happy to be sitting with the people they're sitting with? Are they asked whether they want to sit with that person, or do they just get plonked next to somebody? What's the atmosphere like? So those things are also important, because this is somebody's home. They're moving into a shared community, and you want to feel that it's going to offer them the sort of experience that you would want if you were moving in yourself. Next issue is social life. A care home is more than a series of separate rooms and a few bathrooms. A care home should be about having an experience together as a group of people. And I was lucky with the care home that I worked at, that the whole care home was built in a big rectangle, so that the center of the rectangle was a courtyard, and the courtyard had animals and birds and flower beds and all sorts of things, a lovely garden to sit in. So for people living with dementia, it was an ideal environment, because our corridors were quite wide, which meant that people could freely walk around the building, and many people living with dementia feel obliged to walk. It's a sort of almost a primary motivation for them is to walk. So it allowed them to walk around, and we could hand them bite-sized bits of food or snacks to eat and drink to keep their energy up. But it also meant they could go outside into the courtyard through one of 4 different doors to look at whatever was there, and to be, to enjoy that, which in the summertime or even in the winter time is nice to be able to do. And we had fish and all sorts. So those things are important too. But what program of activities does the home have, and who is delivering those activities? If it's some sort of bored-looking young man who's been told you're going to do activities today, but has had no real training in how to deliver those activities, maybe that's not a good idea. But many homes have really skilled, very up-to-date people providing activities, so that they'll tailor those activities to the needs of your loved one, which is wonderful. And also there should be more than just activities in the main living room. There should be the opportunity, if your loved one is in bed, for somebody to be able to go into their room to deliver activity for them, whether that's a sensory activity. We used to do a lot of aromatherapy and a lot of guided visualization. So if we knew that somebody loved to go to the seaside, we had sensory boxes that would give the smells of the seaside, and we would share those with the resident and talk about the seaside and share pictures and all sorts of things. There's all sorts of ways to help people enjoy their time, even if they are confined to bed. Visitors is the next thing. What is the rules about visiting? And I think I've touched on it. Because of COVID, it's unlikely that you can have a sort of 20-person pile-in, which we were quite used to at the home that I worked in, where people would turn up on a Sunday afternoon and the whole family would congregate in the day room with their loved one, or they would book parties in one of the restaurants, for instance. That's less likely at the moment because of COVID, but you know that the rules are that you have to be allowed at least 2 people visiting at any week. You may only be allowed one at a time, but 2 people can be the nominated visitors at the moment, and that will gradually relax. So as long as we find some way of being able to demonstrate that people are vaccinated and that they are safe to come into the community, then we should find a way through these things, because I think we have to have a balance between the quality of life and preserving the safety of people. And at the moment, sometimes it feels a bit as if we're preserving safety, but at the expense of the quality that people have in their lives. Many people have been completely isolated for many months with only the residents they're living with for company. The next issue is the contracts. If you do decide to go through with moving into a care home, please check the contract, check what the cutoff is if you decide that it's not the home for your loved one. Is there a notice period? Is there a trial period? Some care home chains, I won't name them, but some care home chains really are all about the money, and they just want you to hand over the money immediately. Others will say that they will issue what's called a 12-week property disregard. So let's say your loved one owns a small bungalow or a house or something. Obviously you don't have the cash to hand because it's in their property. So many companies will offer a 12-week property disregard to give you time to place the property on the market, or they will allow you to accrue a debt against the value of the stay. But that is all dependent on the different companies, and they all have very different policies. So you would really need to look at the contract and examine it in detail. If you need support, then please, you can use Citizens Advice Bureau, or there are other firms that will offer, but just watch out for the charges that they may make. Some of these firms that advertise on the internet saying they'll help you with stuff, my experience of them is that they just take a lot of money for not offering a great deal of service. So do check over the contract, ask other family members to have a look at it and test out some of the things. So if I decided to leave after 6 months, how much is that going to cost me or my loved one to move out? And my final issue is about feedback. How do they deal with complaints at this home? Do you have to put your complaint in writing? Is it all dealt with informally? How will you know what's happened to your complaint or the issue that you bring? How do they deal with compliments? Can you see evidence around you in the home of people who feel really happy with the care that they've had or that their loved one has had? So do look up the feedback that's on all sorts of websites about homes. Take some of it with a pinch of salt. Obviously, different tastes, people's tastes differ. What one person will think of as the most important thing about a care home, I might think, well, actually, that's less important than something else. So do take them with a bit of a pinch of salt. But on the whole, if I opened up a website and looked at reviews of a care home and it was full of sort of below average reviews and a lot of comments about shoddy care or uncaring staff, I'd be tempted to walk in the other direction very quickly. So yeah, just check out what the reviews are. So, I mean, I've sort of talked you through, you can get this sort of information very similarly from most of the big groups covering care of older people. So Age UK has a lot of good information. So does Age Concern. And so, yeah, just check out anything you can find. But my biggest test of all is your gut response to a place. If it doesn't quite feel right, it's really not right. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Karen. That was a brilliant session. Thank you. We have just a few questions,
Yeah.
And I'll just start with one that came through on the questions and answers. In terms of, I think you spoke about tailoring to individual needs. In terms of religion and culture, say, how important do you think that is in choosing a care home? Would there be people like religious leaders doing visits, you know, say like a priest or a nun, for example? Would there be kind of cultural events to be inclusive to different communities and that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think any care home worth its salt will be asking the potential resident for their, whether they have any beliefs or religious views, because at the care home, you can then telephone the local faith leaders to say, we have a new resident living with us. They are a member of your faith. Would you be able to pop in and introduce yourself to them? So as a rule of thumb, the majority of the patient or residents living in the care homes typically were members of either the Church of England or Roman Catholic faiths, but an increasing number of residents in care homes are Muslims, Hindus, and the care home that I worked at, we had a variety of services throughout the week for people who share different faiths. And what was lovely was quite often people would go into other faiths rooms to experience that, because I think there's something overarching about faith. To be with people of any faith in an environment that's about calm and sharing and valuing is not going to be detrimental to anybody. But obviously if people want to go in, then that's for them. But I think it's really important that everybody is offered the opportunity for spiritual space and time, whether they follow a religious belief or not.
Thank you so much, Karen, for answering that. I think we have a few more questions.
Okay.
I think, Mary, did you have a question you wanted to come in with?
Yeah, thanks, Karen. That's been really, really comprehensive. And not the question I want to ask. It's interesting the point you make about people of different faiths actually appreciating people of other faiths.
Yeah.
Because that was my experience in a place that I worked, where people from Hindu and Muslim faiths were very happy in a religious home because it had that ethos about it. It wasn't their faith, but it was very important. I suppose I want to go back a little bit to complaints, and just to say, for you as a care manager, if there is a relative that has some kind of a complaint, how best to deal with it? Because older people in general, and particularly in our community, people don't like to complain, but sometimes they have legitimate concerns that should be raised. How would you go about it?
I think the first way to deal with it is to have a word with the home manager, because the home manager or the deputy manager should be there almost every day. The usual things that people complained about in the home that I was sometimes when the washing got done, somebody's socks got mixed up with somebody else's washing. So largely the complaints would be things that were very irritating, but not life-threatening. And I would say if it's a domestic issue about something that you're not happy with, to do with washing, food, anything like that, just go straight to the care manager and say, look, can I have a word? Because this is not great and it's really upset my mum or my dad or me. If it's a care quality issue, then that's slightly different, because I would be raising it verbally with the manager. And I think it's important that you do, because essentially you're paying for it anyway. And if you're not getting the service that you think that your loved one should be getting, you should raise it. But I would always follow up the verbal conversation with something in writing that says, on this day at this time, I raised with you the issue of an incident that troubled my mum on whatever date. Always put it in writing and keep a copy, because if it happens again or it deteriorates, God forbid, then you're going to be able to go then to the Care Quality Commission and say, look, I raised this on this day, this has happened again. The other thing to bear in mind is that when you join a community in a care home, there are other family carers and relatives around. And in our care home, we used to have a couple of meetings a month that were for the relatives and family carers. And that was a real source of compliments and complaints. People would tell us. And the other thing about that is that if they encourage that in the care home, then you know that they're a care home that don't feel they've got anything to hide and they're quite confident in what they're doing. If they try to keep all the families apart and nobody's ever allowed to talk, then you know that you should feel a bit uneasy about that. I would say the more open and transparent they are, the more confident you should feel in their care.
Thanks, Karen. That's amazing. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. We've had a question from one of our volunteers who was a carer for a great number of years for his wife and also for a friend who was living with dementia.
Right.
And the question kind of connects with the theme of complaints, I suppose, and how to change things in the best possible way. So he was talking about his experience often of people talking to him as the carer and sort of talking over the person that living with dementia, and perhaps not making eye contact with the person living with dementia, but always talking to him, and how that can be a very common experience sometimes with busy professionals as well. And I think the question was really about this theme of respect that you've brought up all the way through your talk, really. Sort of how do you kind of address that? How do you address that in the moment and without making a big fuss and making the people, the person that you love, that you're caring for, kind of aware of what's happening? But how do you bring it back to a person-centered sort of conversation?
I think it is really vital, and I'm really pleased that somebody raised it, because nothing makes informal carers and family carers more concerned than feeling that the person that they love, who's been the focus of their attention for so long, is completely overseen by the person in whom they're entrusting their care. To me, it's an issue about training and about values. So I would be very unhappy and upset if I felt that any of the staff that I worked with didn't place the person that they were caring for at the centre of everything. Sometimes I think it happens where care staff are anxious, and if they think that a family carer or family member is coming in and asking a question, they will automatically assume that they have to please the person who's asked it, or they have to please the person who is the carer, because in their mind they feel that the person who's living in their environment it doesn't have the same need. Now, I don't agree with that at all, and I think it shows you, if that's happened in your experience, what it demonstrates is a team that have not been well enough trained and don't have sufficient clinical leadership, because everything that is done in a care home or a nursing home should be person-centred and based on what the resident sees as being the most important thing. And what the resident sees as most important quite often isn't what the family member sees as most important either. So I do want to cut a bit of slack for carers, because quite often, that's why I've said they might be a bit anxious. Quite often the carers will worry that if they're focusing on what the person wants, that might attract disapproval from the family member. I'm trying to think of an example of it, but for some residents, being able to do something that's important to them is more important than the fact that their room is untidy or something like that. I can't think of a good example, but everything we do should be centered around the person. And I think it's a bit like a lot of people would say, if they're wheelchair users, that people interact with them by talking to the person who's supporting them with their wheelchair rather than talking to them. It's the same sort of principle. I think it's about training, about values, and about remembering who you are there for, who you are serving is important. We come into work in their home. We support them, we serve their needs.
Thank you so much, Karen. You've shared so many tips and strategies and ideas in such a thoughtful way, and given us lots to think about. So a very warm thank you from us at Irish in Britain. And just to everybody joining today, a reminder that we have our next Thoughtful Thursday session next Thursday on the 6th of May, the same time at 2 o'clock, where we have Jo from Irish Services in Greenwich, Bexley and Lewisham coming to talk to us about ideas for reminiscence activities that people can try at home. So please do join us for that. And this recording, we will be placing it on our resources section of our website. So if you want to listen back again or encourage others to listen, please do. Thank you.